May I please court?
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Stacey Colton.
And Ms. Colton, where do you work?
I work for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement here locally at the Daytona Beach Field Office,
And in what capacity do you work for Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
both as a crime laboratory analyst and a latent print analyst.
Regarding this case of the state of Florida versus Tobie and Tysjohaun Cooper, in what capacity did you work?
As a crime laboratory analyst,
Now, can you please tell the jury what are your job duties and responsibilities as a crime laboratory analyst with Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
what I'm responsible for is responding to the physical location where a crime has occurred when the investigating agency has requested assistance in the investigation. Upon my arrival, it's my responsibility to document the scene utilizing handwritten notes, photography, sketching with measurements, and to recognize, collect, and submit physical evidence to the crime laboratory.
And what is your experience, training, and education as far as your background that allows you to perform those responsibilities for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
My formal education I received from Buffalo State College in New York, where I received a Bachelor's of Science degree in criminalistics. I was employed by the District 7 Medical Examiner's Office as a morgue technician. My daily duties there consisted of working with the forensic pathologist performing autopsies, assisting him with photography, evidence collection, evidence packaging, recording the inked finger and palm prints of the deceased. I then became employed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. My training in crime scene consisted of a two-phase training program. The first phase, is the academic phase. It was subdivided into approximately 20 tasks that dealt with crime scene investigation. Some of those would be photography, note-taking, crime scene safety, and then studying each discipline within the laboratory, such as biology, firearms, micro, latent fingerprints. During that training, there was required readings, laboratory exercises, and written exams. The second phase was the supervised casework, where under the direct supervision of another certified examiner, I actually went out and was the primary analyst on actual crime scenes, where I demonstrated my skills and abilities in crime scene. And at the conclusion of that, I was given my certification by FDLE.
Thank you, Ms. Colton. Were you working in that capacity in the evening hours of June 30th, 2004?
Yes, I was.
And were you called to an address, or did you respond to 319 Center Avenue in Holly Hill?
Yes, I was.
And is that in Volusia County, Florida?
Yes, it is.
And do you recall what time you arrived at that crime scene?
I arrived there at 11:30 p.m.
What did you first observe as you responded to that scene?
I first observed police vehicles. The scene was secured by the standard yellow crime scene tape at the perimeter of the residence. There were some exterior lights on at a duplex, a two-sided residence, if you will. At the 319 address, there was a body with a yellow sheet at the entrance of that residence, and then also a business card placed over a firearm casing on the sidewalk.
Now, once you respond to the scene, your job and your responsibility is to document that scene, and you've said through photographs and notes. Do you have a particular order on how you do that?
Well, there's actually two of us working simultaneously, myself and another individual. Typically, I begin the communication with the agency that's on site. We exchange information like case numbers, any subject and victim name information, any preliminary information that we have about what occurred. This is all while I'm taking notes. The other individual is documenting the scene as is with a camera, taking photographs.
And in this case, who was assisting you from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Mr. Mel.
Tim Mel?
Tim Mel.
Okay. And when you are exchanging information and documenting the scene, are you also in the process of analyzing what evidence you should be looking for and what you want to take particular notice of?
Yes, there is a principle called low cards exchange principle, and this principle states that when a criminal comes in contact with an environment, another person, or perhaps an object, a transfer may occur. And with that in mind, I start to think to myself, based on the information that I see at the scene, in particular this case, there was a casing laying on the sidewalk. So I know that firearms evidence is going to be very important. And of course, the deceased and his position as well is going to be necessary to document.
And am I correct, Ms. Colton, in that you have responded to numerous crime scenes involving different causes, different mechanisms of death, beatings, stabbings, shootings, etc.?
That's correct.
Okay. And is it a fair statement to say that if there is a shooting, there's not much exchange between a suspect and a victim?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
What kind of in a beating case or a stabbing case, tell me, would you expect more?
Objection relevance.
I think this is background, but go ahead first of all and finish your question.
Thank you. Would you expect more transfer of evidence between a defendant or suspect and a victim?
Yes, when there's personal physical contact, yes, there would be more potential for transfer.
And likewise, what would your opinion be regarding a shooting where there is no personal contact?
Then there would possibly be limited transfer.
Now, when you noticed the casing on the ground, you stated that that was marked. Did you take note on how that was marked?
A business card was tented, folded in half, and just laid next to it as an indicator that there's a very small object here, and it was dark, so that it was an attempt to make sure that no one stepped on it or moved it.
And you talked briefly about Investigator Tim Mell taking photographs. All those photographs were taken prior to any removal of evidence. Is that correct?
Yes, a series of photographs are taken before the evidence is moved.
Okay. May I approach the bench, Your Honor?
Please, Mr. Court, may we inspect the exhibits before they're handed about the court?
Yes.
Thank you.
But counsel, the exhibit has potential exhibits.
We're going to have some objections to some of the exhibits, and I think we need to do that outside the presence of.
Sounds good. While we're on that, this case, do you plan on other exhibits as well, photographs or other?
We're going to have other exhibits. These would be this would be all the photographs right here.
All photographs?
For this witness.
Okay. Well, what I was thinking is let's take this. we're at a point for an afternoon break anyway. I'm going to release the jury till 3:10. That should give us enough time to discuss these matters. We may have to take a couple extra minutes before you go. You may not discuss this case with anyone or among yourselves. You may not listen to or watch any media of any kind. You should not form an opinion on this case until you've heard all the evidence, the arguments, and the law. Please turn your notepads over, leave them on your seat, and you are released until 3:10. All right, thank you. For the record, we're in the testimony here of Ms. Colton, and there were some proposed photographs. They appear to be on 3 poster boards of multiple photos each. Now, are they marked for the record so that we can refer to them?
Yes, sir. Your Honor, on behalf of Mr. Cooper, we will be objecting to State's Exhibit E for identification, which is a composite of 4 photographs. The photograph, as I'm showing the court, is the upper right-hand corner. That's the one that I'm objecting to. My understanding is the purpose of this photograph is to identify a shell casing, which I have yet to see, but I'm not disputing it. Oh, it looks like a cigarette butt, okay. All right, a shell casing right here. That's on the lower, the shell casing is on the top of the lower 2/3, and above that is nothing but a puddle of blood and the deceased body. We don't think that it's necessary. That can be cropped. And the same thing, the same purpose of the photograph preserved without having the inflammatory puddle of blood. That'd be our objection. Unnecessarily inflammatory. I mean, if it was necessary, so be it, but it doesn't appear to be.
On behalf of Ms. Colton, we'll be joining that motion.
All right, let's take that one first, and then we'll discuss whatever others are. Yes.
Yes, this is extremely relevant and necessary to show the exact positioning of the casing relative to Mr. Cataneo's body, about where he fell, where he was shot. I'm somewhat surprised at this. This is the most benign picture of all the homicide cases I think I've tried. In addition, this pool of blood will also become relevant because that is where Ms. Colton ran her hands through the blood and found a fragment that will be entering into evidence. So this picture is necessary. It shows the casing in relation to where exactly it was found, and there's plenty of case law that says that it comes from.
Can I ask you said that picture shows where her fingers were put through the blood? Is that what you said?
This puddle of blood will become relevant when I'm sure we'll get to it in the next set of pictures. Ms. Colton found a fragment in this puddle of blood right here.
All right, any further argument on this?
No.
Objections overruled. Do we have another?
Yes. Was there anything else in here? We didn't discuss this one.
There's the wounds. This is the exact one that was found. This is the blood where Ms. Colton found the fragment.
Right. Your Honor, as to State's Exhibit D for identification, we'll be objecting to the photograph that appears at the bottom of that exhibit, which said Exhibit D is comprised of 3 photographs, 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. We're objecting to the one on the bottom, again on the grounds that the puddle of blood in that photograph is unnecessarily inflammatory.
Judge, we further object the 2 pictures being the top left and the bottom center. We would argue are duplicitous and further stipulate to the death of Mr. Cataneo and the fact he died by gunshot wound. Ask that you not allow the photos in.
the state does not have to take that stipulation. We're entitled to prove it, but as far as these being duplicitous, that's not correct. That's not accurate. We're entitled to show the victim.
You mean duplicative.
Okay, whatever that word. This shows the doors in relation to the body. It gives you a better view of the whole area and the amount of area in there. And this is a close-up shot of the wound and exactly where Mr. Cataneo fell.
Objection to photographs overruled. Anything else? Anything before we break? All right, we'll reassemble at 3:10. Yes.
It's just for scheduling purposes, or is it the court's intention to try to go to that normal business day, so to speak?
Yeah, 5-ish, although, again, if we get up 10 minutes to 5, and I don't want to stop in the middle of a witness if we can avoid that.
Yes, sir.
While we're outside the presence of the jury, let the court know, I think, obviously, this case is finishing Ms. Colton, which I believe will be a little while, to go through the crime scene and the evidence. Probably, as it stands on my next witness, was going to be Lynn Blake. So, I'll get right into that. I just want, if there's mention about co-conspirator statements, I'm comfortable proceeding on with it. They're very limited. The statements that she attributes to Ms. Tobie about Mr. Cooper are very limited. I mean, there are enough statements that she heard directly from Mr. Cooper and Ms. Tobie. But I'm just throwing that, I'll let everybody know that. So I'd rather deal with that before she testifies than have to have his objection deal with it in the middle of her testimony. So I guess
We might have to do a proffer on part of this. But Mr. Davis, I can't, I mean, you've got to be the one to kind of know what needs to be proffered.
That was the purpose of last hearing. I had laid it out based on depositions, based on statements, how I expected it. Most of it, the way I've set up, or a lot of it's going to be after she testifies, but most of it's contained within her own testimony. Most of the evidence of conspiracy is what she heard herself, not only from Ms. Tobie, it's replete with that, but even from Mr. Cooper. They're very limited. I said, I only think of a couple times when she says that Ms. Tobie actually said something about Mr. Cooper. That would be the co-conspirator statements. The rest is just direct evidence from the defendants about what they're saying at the time. So, and she's present for most of those. So I'm just throwing that out that and need to be dealt with. Again, I'd rather do it sooner versus later.
Okay, good.
For scheduling purposes, Your Honor, I expect Ms. Blake, even for the state, to be a lengthy witness.
As do I.
A lengthy witness, a lengthy cross, probably by...
Well, what we might want to do is consider a proffer this afternoon and let the jury go.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
And then we can do our work that would have to be done in their absence anyway. And then, but they could have the welcome relief, I'm sure, of going to their homes instead of sitting around here while we do that. All right, well, let's continue with this witness, and we'll give that some thought, but that sounds like a good idea. Take the proffer of whatever it's going to be, and prior to that time, I'll let the jury go for the day. Are we ready? Anything else before we bring in the jury? All right, let's bring in the jury, please. All right, let the record reflect that the jury is all present, accounted for. The parties are present. The representatives are present as well. Ms. Case?
Thank you, Your Honor. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Ms. Colton, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit D for identification. Can you take a look at those pictures and tell me if you recognize them?
Yes, I do.
And what are they pictures of general?
These are photographs of the entrance to the Residence 319 Center Street and the location and placement of the deceased in that entrance.
And do these photographs accurately represent the entrance to that home and the deceased in his position as you saw them back on June 30th, 2004?
Yes, they do.
At this time, Your Honor, I move State's Evidence D for identification into evidence of State's Evidence 2, I believe.
It would be 2, but before we get to that, is there, other than what we've talked about on the record, is there
Nothing
any?
further on. We do have objection then.
All right, so noted.
Thank you.
No further objection, Your Honor.
All right, that is, which one is it? Is it D?
D.
D is in dog. And that will be, that's a composite of 3 photographs, and that will be admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit Number 2.
Ms. Colton, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit E for identification. Do you recognize these photographs?
Yes, I do.
And generally, what are they photographs of?
They are photographs that depict the items of physical evidence that were located at the scene, 1, 2, and 3 labeled.
And do these photographs accurately depict where you located evidence at the scene?
Yes, they do.
And this is on June 30th, 2004, correct?
These 2 are on the 30th. This one is on the following day.
And we'll get into that. 2 of the cases were found that night. 1 of the cases was found the next day when you went back in daylight, correct?
That's correct.
Do these photographs accurately depict that evidence?
Yes.
At this point, the state would move into evidence State's E for identification as State's evidence 3.
May I just ask a brief one-hour question?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Ms. Colton.
Good afternoon.
Is it my understanding that on this Exhibit E, that some of the photographs were taken the next day?
That's correct.
Do you know what the status of the crime scene was up until the time that these photographs were taken?
By status, you mean?
By status, I mean, was the crime scene kept secure?
Yes,
There was the tape was up the whole time?
absolutely. Overnight.
Were you there the whole time?
No.
How is it that you know that it was kept secure the whole time?
Holly Hill PD was in charge of the scene and for holding it overnight.
And what time were the photographs that were taken in the daylight? What time of day were they taken?
They were taken between my arrival at 9:30 the following morning and my departure at 12:15.
Who was there at 9:30 when you got there?
I believe it was Sergeant Klein that was holding the crime scene log.
Okay, thank you.
Just so we're clear, there was crime scene tape around the crime scene, and there was a posted law enforcement officer at the crime scene in
Yes.
the morning when you got there at 9:30.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, we have, Exhibit E is 4 photos. For the record, would you identify, left upper, right upper, so on? Which are the ones that were taken that night, and which are the ones that were taken the next day?
Left upper, right upper, taken that night.
Correct.
Lower left, lower right, taken the next morning.
Correct.
All right, that clear to everybody?
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Okay, as noted then, the 4 photos as identified will be admitted as State's
Oh,
exhibit.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, just for the record, we would make a further objection as to the bottom 2 photographs on relevancy unless the continuity and security of that crime scene can be tied up tight.
Your Honor, I think it has been already.
I'm going to overrule the objection, and that's admitted as State's Exhibit Number 3.
On behalf of Ms. Carter, we would join in that objection, Your Honor.
Okay, so noted, and Sam.
Ms. Colton, I'm now showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit C for identification. And you recognize these photographs.
Yes, I do.
What are these photographs of?
These are general overall photographs of the residents of 319, as well as the adjoining north duplex unit to this residence.
And do these photographs accurately depict the duplex and what you saw in the back of the duplex at the time of your arrival on June 30th, 2004?
Yes, they do.
At this time, I would move States C for identification into evidence as States 4.
No objection.
No objection.
Without objection, identification C is admitted as State's Exhibit number 4. And that would be a composite of 4 photos.
Ms. Colton, would these photographs assist you in describing to the jury exactly what you saw when you observed the crime scene and the positioning of the victim and the evidence you located?
Yes, they will.
Your Honor, may the witness have permission to step down and look, describe from the photographs to the jury, answer questions down here?
Yes. Counsel, you're invited to position yourselves so that you can see the photographs as they're being discussed.
With permission of the court, I would like to go outside and down to the first row on the right of the audience.
All right. Is that immediately behind the jury?
So that I could see, I'd have to. Otherwise, I'd have to be able to see around the corner.
Okay.
Or I could go over that door. Let's go over here and I can go to the TV.
And perhaps you can tilt that easel so that the jury and counsel can all see it.
Can you see it, gentlemen? Ms. Colton, can you please take the jury through these photographs and explain to them what they depict?
In the upper left-hand photograph, you'll see the residence sign 319 indicating the front yard driveway area with the white van parked in the driveway. It says Cataneo on it. It's a plumbing company. This is the entrance to the southern unit here. You can see that there's some exterior lighting on. This is how it was seen when I came up to the yellow crime scene tape. This perspective is standing, if you will, if I walked in that direction and looked back at the entrance again of the unit.
And let me say, is this the left side of the unit? If you were facing the duplex, is this the left apartment or home?
Yes, this is the adjoining northernmost unit that has a driveway of its own with a vehicle parked in it. This is the driveway I just showed you here with this van parked in it, and this is the entranceway to 319. Down here, this is a photograph depicting both of them simultaneously. You can see the entrance to 319 here and the entrance to the adjoining unit beside it. The victim lying as he was found in the doorway there with a yellow EMS sheet over his body.
Okay, Ms. Colton, so let me just make sure that I understand this. If I'm standing at the street looking to the duplex, the victim is on the right side of the duplex, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, not the left side, the right side.
The right side.
Okay.
And this photograph is a picture of the rear of both units. This is a sliding glass door to unit 319, and this is a sliding glass door that leads to the adjoining duplex next to the pool and some furniture and things in the rear of these.
So this sliding glass door right here goes to this apartment, is that correct?
That's correct. If I walked down the side of this driveway and up to the rear of the residence and turned around, I would see, this is what you would see.
All right, if you'll just stay right there. Using state's evidence too, would you please describe for the jury these photographs and what they depict?
The upper left photograph depicts the victim in his position in the entrance of the residence here after the yellow sheet has been removed.
And when you when this photograph is taken after the yellow sheet has been moved, has anybody moved Mr. Cataneo at this point?
No. And it also shows this door here leads to a closet that was open and unlocked. This leads to the actual entrance into the residence. This photograph here is after the victim has been removed, showing some blood spatter on the walls behind him and onto his sides. And this photograph here depicts a up-close photograph of Mr. Cataneo and a defect in his shirt and a defect in his left face area cheek here in this photograph.
Can Ms. Colton take the stand? I'm going to have her come down again after she explains some more evidence, but I have some other questions. Now, Ms. Colton, you talked about taking, Mr. Mell's taking photographs and you're taking measurements. Describe how that's done. And why don't we start with the victim? Did you take measurements of exactly where he was in that doorway?
Yes, that's part of the documentation. Measurements are taken from 2 points in this particular case, from 2 walls that make up that entrance area. I measured several areas on the victim's body to those 2 walls so that there's documentation of his exact position. That same process is done with any physical evidence that I remove from the scene. First, it's photographed as is where it was found. Exhibit numbers are given to the exhibits that I'm going to take from the scene. And then each item is measured in and photographed again with the yellow tents that indicate the number assigned to the physical evidence. And then items can be picked up and removed.
So you photographed any items you're going to collect with the identification, yellow tent numbers on them, and taken measurements of where those items are in comparison to a fixed place. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Before collecting the evidence?
Before collecting, yes.
Okay, could you step down again, please?
Yes.
Could you please explain to the jury State's Evidence 3 and these photographs, the tent markings that you have, and what they indicate?
In the upper left hand, this is a photograph showing the physical location of a casing that I gave number 1. This is my marker here, and its relationship to the scene and the victim's body. Number 2, this is a photograph of that exhibit that was discovered actually during the process of the medical examiner performing a visual exam of the deceased. During the process of bagging his hands, she moved his arm and revealed a second casing that was underneath his left arm. So that was immediately labeled and photographed and measured. Number 3 is a casing. This is a medium shot standing back, showing you that there's a grassy area followed by a sidewalk leading into the entrance of the home where the victim was found. This is a close-up of number 3. The casing is actually lying here within the grass in front of the residence.
Okay. You can have a seat, Ms. Colton. Ms. Colton, when you photographed those items 1 and 2, they were that night, June 30th, 2004. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Tell us about the process of the medical examiner's office coming in to look at the body, how that works and what you do.
After I complete my photography and my measurements of the items that I've tagged and marked, and remove them and get them out of the way so that they're not disturbed and or stepped on. The investigator from the medical examiner's office is allowed to come up to the deceased, perform a visual exam, take her photographs or his, take some notes, and put brown paper bags over the hands of the victims to preserve any potential evidence that may be on the victim's hands. The body is sometimes moved a little bit, as you saw in that photograph. Upon moving his left arm, it revealed another piece of physical evidence, so it's collected. When she was done with that, the body was placed into a body bag, zipped and locked with a seal. It's a locking seal, so that the body can be transported to the medical facility, the District 7 Medical Examiner's Office, and an autopsy can be performed.
Now, who was the medical examiner investigator in this case?
Her name was Amanda Fitch.
And when Ms. Fitch is completing her job and responsibilities with regards to the victim, are you watching and taking notes and things like that?
Yes.
Did you actually see her put the Mr. Cataneo in a body bag and lock it with the medical examiner's lock and seal?
Yes, I did.
And that has a number, doesn't it, so that you can keep track of that particular?
Objection leading.
Yeah.
Sustained.
Is the body marked in some way to make sure that that we know which one is in that body bag?
Yes, the seal was documented in my notes. I believe it was number 301.
Now, after Mr. Cataneo was removed from the scene, did that end your part of the investigation that night?
For that night, yes, it did.
And tell the jury why that was.
Well, we had, with it being dark, we had performed a visual search of the area and collected the items number 1 and 2 and measured the deceased into his location. Then we requested that the scene be held over because we like to go back during daylight hours and take additional photographs during the daytime and resume searching for any additional casings that may be in that grass. They're very hard to see in the dark, so we felt that daylight would be beneficial for us to continue our searching.
And when you say hold over, is that a term that law enforcement uses as far as keeping the scene secure and letting no one in it?
Yes, I made that request to the Holly Hill PD. I believe it was Sergeant Borelli that made the arrangements to have an officer spend the night there. The crime scene tape is maintained. It's not taken down. It's as is, so that upon my arrival the next day, the scene is secured and I can continue with my searching.
What time did you leave Mr. Cataneo's home that night?
Can I refer to my notes?
Yes, please.
I left at 2:50 a.m.
So you arrived, I think you said around 11:30 p.m.?
11:30. Mm-hmm.
And you left at 2:15 a.m.?
2:50.
2:50?
Yeah.
250, okay. When you came back in the morning, I believe you said at 9:30, was the scene secured?
Yes, it was.
And was there an officer at the scene?
Yes, there was.
What did you do when you came back the next morning?
The first thing that was done was additional photographs. Then I decided to use a metal detector to search the grassy area in front of the residence, just beyond the sidewalk, all the way up to a large planter that existed some distance from the front of the residence. It was metal detected 3 different times when we found the casing exhibit number 3 out there.
And I'm not going to have you step down, I'll come up to you just to make sure we're clear. I'm showing you what's been marked as state's evidence 3. So the top left photo is marked by number 1. That casing was found, when was that found?
That was found the evening of June 30th, I'm sorry.
Likewise, the casing marked by number 2.
That's correct?
The casings in the 2 lower pictures marked by number 3. Is that the casing you found with a metal detector?
Yes.
And you've gone over that area how many times?
This area and both the planters on both sides of the entrance 3 times.
After you found that third casing, did you find any other evidence?
Yes.
What did you find?
I decided to put some gloves on, several pair of gloves, and finger my way through the area where Mr. Cataneo's head was.
What does that mean, finger your way through?
I felt my way through the pooled blood that was underneath, that would have been underneath his head, to feel for any fragments, projectile fragments, to see if any existed in that area.
Okay. Let me show you what's already been entered as state's evidence too for identification. Can you show the jury what area you're talking about that you fingered through or felt through?
This area here, I felt through all of that area and discovered a projectile fragment in that pooled blood.
And what did you do with that projectile fragment?
I collected it and sent it to the laboratory.
Okay. And my understanding from your testimony is that you've taken exact measurements where you found the casings in regards to different fixed areas, the walls and so forth. Did you do that with the projectile fragment you found in Mr. Cataneo's blood?
I believe I did.
Okay, can you look?
No, actually I did not in there because I felt like my involvement in moving it around, I could have
Your
moved
Honor,
it.
I'm going to interpose an objection. Apparently, there's no question asked, and between the last answer, which I believe I did, the witness has, let the record reflect, has referred to some notes. There's been no establishment that she has faulty recall. If that's the case, then let the record so reflect.
Your Honor, she quite clearly said she wasn't sure, she needed to check her notes.
You got a couple of objections here. Number one, I think there was a question pending. She was checking her notes to find the answer to that question, so that part's overruled. Secondly, she's certainly allowed to refer to her notes in an effort to ensure herself that her testimony is accurate. You are, of course, allowed to examine these notes if you wish to do so.
We will at the appropriate time, sir, to examine her notes.
Your Honor, and they already have her notes for the record.
As you well know, any notes that are referred to in the courtroom can be viewed by all counsel.
Okay, so my question was, did you take measurements of the projectile fragment that you found in Mr. Cataneo's pooled blood?
No, I did not.
And why did you not take measurements of that particular piece of evidence?
Because I moved my hands through that area and potentially probably moved it myself to actually feel it. And I labeled it as a possible fragment because I did not know for sure that it actually was. It was covered in blood. It felt to me hard, so I collected it. It wasn't myself that determined it was a projectile. It was the firearms discipline who determines if it actually is a projectile fragment.
Do you recall off the top of your head cartridge 1, 2, and 3 and their measurements in response to different areas at that crime scene?
Do I have their measurements?
Yes. Do you remember them off the top of your head?
No.
Okay. Do you need to use your notes to refresh your memory?
Yes.
About that? Would you do that let's start with cartridge 1. I believe that's on the sidewalk in front of the residence. What's the exact location with regards to that?
Number 1, one cartridge case location on the sidewalk in front of the residence. Was 95 inches from the A wall and 19 inches from B wall.
And what was A and B wall?
The A wall, if you're facing the entrance, is the wall directly in front of you. And the B wall is the closet door wall.
And is that the cartridge casing that was marked with a business card when you arrived on the scene?
That's correct.
Would you tell us cartridge 2 or B?
B was located 29 inches from A wall and 11 inches from B wall.
And then in cartridge 3 or C, the one you found the next morning?
C was located 139 inches from A wall and 18 inches from B wall.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Colton, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit A for identification. Do you recognize this packaging? Oh, I'm sorry.
A?
Oh, I'm sorry, K.
K.
Excuse me.
Yes, I do recognize it.
And what is it?
This is the brown paper bag that I labeled and placed item number 1 or casing A into.
And how do you recognize that packaging?
I wrote the FDLE case number, exhibit number, and my initials, as well as our evidence label on the outside.
And is the packaging in the same or substantially the same condition as when you packaged it that night?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, this time I would move the State's K for identification to evidence as State's 5, I believe.
That's correct. Any objection?
No objection.
No, sir.
All right, without objection, IDK is admitted as State's 5.
Could we just inspect the exhibit?
Yes.
Take a look at it?
I was going to have to take it out.
No objection, Your Honor.
Ms. Colton, will you take what's in that bag out? And is that the shell casing that you labeled as A for your record?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I publish this to the jury?
Yes, any objection? Go ahead.
You want me to just pass it, or?
Yes, so they inspect it and pass it to the next one. Let the record reflect that the jury has looked at Exhibit 5.
Ms. Colton, I'm showing you what's marked as State's Exhibit N for identification. Do you recognize that packaging?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
I labeled this bag with the FDLE case number, exhibit number, my initials, and it also has the evidence label on the outside.
And can you take a look inside that package and tell me if what's in it and the packaging itself is in the same, substantially the same condition as when you packaged it that evening?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would move State's evidence N for identification into evidence as State 6.
No objection.
Ms. Monk?
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, N, states N will be admitted into evidence as states 6.
And can I pass this?
Yes. Let the record reflect that the jury has examined states 6.
I'm showing you, Ms. Colton, what's marked as State's Exhibit L for identification. Will you take a look at that and tell me if you recognize that package?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
I labeled it with the FDLE case number, the item number, my initials, and it also has the evidence label on the exterior.
You take a look at what's inside the packaging itself and make sure that it's in the same or substantially the same condition as the new package.
Yes, it is.
And this particular piece of evidence, this cartridge casing, was the one that you found the next morning, correct?
That's correct.
Your Honor, at this time I would introduce State's L for identification as State's Evidence 7.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection.
Without objection, it will be received, that's L, will be received as states Exhibit 7.
And lastly, Your Honor, the State, Ms. Colton, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit M for identification. You took it, take a look at that, please. And do you recognize what that is?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
It is item number 4, the possible projectile fragment D. This package was labeled by me with the FDLE case number, the exhibit number, my initials, as well as the evidence container sticker.
And looking inside that package is the contents inside that package and the packaging in the same or substantially the same condition as being packaged in.
The fragment appears to have been placed into a small envelope, probably by the firearms examiners after it was cleaned for examination.
And is that part of the normal protocol when you submit evidence to another discipline within the laboratory that they might place the particular piece of evidence in another envelope?
That's yes.
Other than that, is the packaging and the fragment itself in the same or substantially the same condition as being packaged in?
Yes, it is. Very tiny.
At this time, Your Honor, I would move State's Exhibit M for identification into State's Evidence 8.
No objection.
No objection.
And because it's so small, I'm not going to publish it this time to the jury.
All right. Without objection, State's ID M is received in evidence as State's Exhibit 8.
Don't have any further questions, Mr. Witness.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Your Honor, we would like the opportunity to inspect the notes that she's been referring to before we begin our cross.
Okay. Do you have those notes with you, Ms. Colton?
I do.
Okay. And are they complete?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. They'll be given to... Do you want...
Would he like some direction as to which ones are mine? Because it contains additional information as well.
All right. She said it contains additional information. What?
Just whatever notes she was referring to.
Yeah, what are you referring to? Can you clip them or something? Or?
I can pull out mine, sure.
Okay, if you do that.
Or not necessarily hers, any that she was referring to.
Yes,
Support her testimony.
yes, any you were
Yeah.
referring to.
Yeah,
But I
that
think
would be
she'll
mine.
refer to her own. Everybody like to take this opportunity once again to stand up? You don't have to stand
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you.
May I inquire?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Ms. Colton.
Good afternoon.
Who was it that requested the gunshot residue analysis?
Sergeant Borelli contacted me while I was at the scene and told me the individuals he would like to have stubbed.
Say that again?
Sergeant Borelli at the
Yes.
scene that evening
Yes.
came to me and requested that Karen Tobie and Ann Cataneo be stubbed for GSR that evening.
The term stubbed, what does that
That's the
mean?
method of collection of gunshot residue.
And what does that mean?
It means that an item that contains a adhesive material is stubbed on the backside of an individual's hands. Then a second one is stubbed on the interior portion of their hands. And it's this piece of evidence that's intended to collect any potential gunshot residue that may be on an individual's hands.
If you know, how does that process work?
The process of...
The analysis of the stubbing, I suppose, is it like a gummy surface? It lifts any possible residue off the hands of the individual being tested?
The stubs are sent to the gunshot residue analysis discipline. That examination is performed by an analyst within that unit. There's instrumentation that he uses to look for gunshot residue particles.
Was a gunshot residue stubbing, I guess is that a proper term?
Sure, yes.
Was that gunshot residue stubbing process done on Lynn Blake?
Not by me, no.
Was it requested, to your knowledge, by anyone?
Not
To
to
your
me.
knowledge?
To my knowledge, no.
To your knowledge, was one ever done on Lynn Blake?
Not to my knowledge.
Now, the medical examiner did one on Mr. Cataneo, is that correct?
The
Cataneo.
investigator that evening took one that night on Mr. Cataneo, yes.
And we notice in one of the photographs there that there are bags on Mr. Cataneo's hands.
That's correct.
The purpose of that is to preserve any possible DNA evidence, for example, that may be under the fingernails of the deceased, correct?
That's one reason, yes.
Or any other evidence that may be on or about the deceased's hands,
That's correct.
so that the bagging process prevents the hands from otherwise being contaminated by any other substances, correct?
Correct.
Or at least that's the purpose.
Right.
Did you find any fingerprints at the scene?
No.
Did you find any evidence that was subject to or usable for DNA testing?
To prove, looking
Or
for,
whatever? Did you get any DNA evidence from the scene?
no.
Did you get any footwear or foot impression evidence from the scene?
No.
Were there any bloody footprints leaving on the sidewalk, for example?
No.
Do you have any specific knowledge of exactly what happened between Mr. John Cataneo and his apparent assailant or assailants?
What happened was his assailant shot him at the entrance of his residence.
Do you have any specific knowledge of what may have happened or precipitated that?
No.
Do you know where the gun came from that apparently shot John Cataneo?
No, I do not.
Do you know whether or not that gun was in John Cataneo's possession, for example?
No.
Do you know whether or not, and could you help us with whether or not John Cataneo had the gun and the assailant wrestled the gun away from him?
No.
Do you have to have daylight to use a metal detector?
No, you don't have to have it.
Did you use a metal detector when you were there and arrived at 11:30 to 2 something a.m.?
That evening I did not.
Were you there, or did you have that scene under any type of video surveillance? Were you there, for example, from 2 a.m. until you arrived back at 9:30?
No.
So your knowledge that you report to us is based upon what you may have heard from someone else about the status of the scene from the time that you left at 2:30 a.m. in the morning approximately till the time that you returned at 9:30 in the morning approximately on July the 1st.
What is the question?
You don't have any specific knowledge about what happened at that scene, firsthand specific knowledge of what happened at that scene from the time that you left at 2:30 a.m. approximately on July the 1st until 9:30 in the morning on July the 1st.
No, I was not there.
When you arrived, the exterior lights of the duplexes were on, correct?
That's correct.
On both sides.
At this moment, I only recall 319 unless it's shown in one of the photographs.
And 319 is where Mr. Cataneo was found, correct?
That's correct.
And did you note in your report, do I recollect accurately, that you noted that the shell casings were rimfire?
I wrote that they were labeled 22 caliber REM,
What
which
does
is
that
the
mean?
manufacturer, I believe. I believe it's Remington.
Can you tell us, based upon your training and experience, anything about what may have happened in regard to the firing of the bullets, that is, squeezing the trigger to the weapon, and Mr. Cataneo, as to where you found these shell casings?
You can see in the photographs that they were found, I guess you would say, to his left side, forward of his position, and under him.
Now, from the photographs that are now in evidence in State's Exhibit 2, we see Mr. Cataneo's body in the upper left-hand corner, and his feet are protruding from what we call this the stoop. His feet are outside of that stoop, correct?
Correct.
Based upon your experience, would you conclude that Mr. Cataneo was standing outside of the stoop, meaning away from the structure, when he was shot?
He very well could have been standing immediately in or just outside of, but there's no way to put him in an exact location.
Do you see anything around these walls that would indicate that Mr. Cataneo was shot and staggered up and hit the wall with a bleeding head? You see any blood smears?
There's blood spatter there on those 3 walls.
Okay.
Whether that came from his injuries or his head, I cannot tell you.
Would it be possible that this spatter was caused by him falling into a pool of blood?
No, because I believe their direction was in a downward direction.
So what would you conclude from that? That he was standing when that blood spatter was formed on the wall here?
Yes.
And what, can you tell us anything about where Mr. Cataneo would have been positioned at that time?
I can only say he was standing in that vicinity of that entrance of that home.
In the same photograph, right in front of the stoop being referred to as that part of the entrance where the doors are. And there's also bricks there, correct?
Correct.
And then the sidewalk is concrete, correct?
Correct.
Approximately, well, adjacent to Mr. Cataneo's left knee, there appears to be some blood evidence. Is that what that is?
Yes.
Now, is that spatter or is that a droplets of blood? Or did you note the difference?
I did not note the difference.
Would you think that'd be important?
That would be interpreted by a blood spatter expert.
Would it be fair to conclude that Mr. Cataneo had, for that blood evidence to be there, in the way that it is, do you see what I'm referring to? You need to take a closer look at it?
No, I see it.
Would it be fair to conclude that Mr. Cataneo had to be standing outside of that stoop for that blood to get there?
Just outside of it, perhaps, at a moment in time, sure. His placement could have moved.
It doesn't appear from any of the photographic evidence that Mr. Cataneo was inside that stoop and stumbled around and hit a wall with a bleeding head or had his hands on his head. It appears that he pretty much went straight to the ground, doesn't it? Doesn't appear that he staggered around much.
I didn't see any indication of any staggering.
In other words, if he would have wobbled around, then there would have been blood spatter to pretty much indicate that he stumbled around or took steps, and there would be blood on the ground indicating that that would have been the case.
If he were standing long enough, yes.
The numbered stanchions that are in the photographs, did you put those in there? I'm going to show you, hold up and show you what's been marked for, well, entered into evidence, the State's Exhibit 3.
Yes, those are markers utilized by me to indicate the exhibit numbers.
I'm just wondering, when did you put the number 3 down there? Was that in the morning after you came back?
That was the next day, yes.
When did you put the number 1 down? Was that night or?
The nighttime, yes.
What's this over here on the blood splatter? Looks like a paper towel.
There was a paper bag found there as well.
How come we don't see it in the photograph in State's Exhibit number 2?
Because when the yellow EMS sheet was removed, the brown paper bag was moved as well, because there was information that it was placed there by those people.
How did the brown paper bag get there?
To my knowledge, I believe it was the EMS personnel that put it there. I'm not sure why.
It appears in the photograph in the upper right-hand corner of State's Exhibit number 3 that the paper bag is covering up blood spatter. Does it? Does that appear to be the case to you?
Covering up?
Sure. In
Perhaps
other
that's
words,
why they put it there, so they wouldn't step in it.
Okay. Is that standard procedure?
In an effort to not step in blood?
Yes.
Standard procedure. I'd rather them not step in it and track it all over than not put a brown paper bag there.
Well, do you think that it's a good idea for anybody to, I mean, it's only a small grouping of blood splatter. Wouldn't it be best just not even to mess with that?
I would say that someone probably responded to the scene and checked on Mr. Cataneo to see if he was alive, and in that effort put that brown paper bag down so that they're not stepping on evidence, as well as put the yellow sheet over him. That I'm speculating. I don't know that that's what they did or why they did it.
Well, it appears clear from the photographs that the blood splatter came first and the bag came second.
True.
Is that what you call preserving the integrity of a crime scene?
In an effort to not step in the blood, I believe that that was what they did.
Would the bag alter that blood, perhaps even absorb it?
Potentially.
I have no further questions.
No questions?
Ms. Colton, you're familiar with some of EMT's procedures, and based on your training experience, is it common that they have to go up to the person and actually check on the person?
Yes,
They can't just stand back and say, oh, he looks dead to me.
correct.
Okay. And you did take a photograph with the bag in its place where it was, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And how many photographs would you say you took of this crime scene?
I believe I took around 130.
Talking about the entrance. And where Mr. Cataneo was. This door right here with this knob, what is that a door to?
That's a door leading to a closet.
And you testified that it was unlocked, is that correct?
Correct.
This door right here, right next to Mr. Cataneo, what door is that?
That's the door leading to his residence.
And do you recall, what are these right here on this picture? These hinges?
Yes.
And is this the doorknob?
Correct.
Which way did that door open?
Out towards the outside.
So it opened out this way? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So it did not, and let me just see if I can do this. If I'm coming out the door, it didn't open this way,
No.
right? It didn't open this way.
Correct.
So it opened this way.
Correct.
So if somebody said it opened the other way, that'd be wrong. It opened with this coming out here, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, did you find blood spatter on that door?
Yes, there was some in this area of the entrance door.
Okay. And then blood spatter back here, correct?
Right. Correct.
And that would indicate that the front door was shut at the time that Mr. Cataneo was shot.
Yes.
May I just have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
No further questions.
Anything on that
Just one minor matter for clarification. Ms. Colton, just for clarification, whether you call it right or left or in or out, we're looking at the top right photograph in State's Exhibit number 2. And if you're facing the picture,
excuse me, that would be the top left.
oh, I'm sorry, top left. It's my top right, it's your top left. Your top left, as you're looking at the photograph, I'm sorry. Top left is the door on the left, the door into the house, and not the closet.
Correct.
Now, does that door open toward the back wall that we see with the planter on it?
Yes.
So it doesn't open out into the sidewalk, rather it opens out toward that back door.
That's
I mean,
correct.
toward the back wall.
Wall, right, correct.
Well, that's good enough. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, I'm confused now, because I guess maybe we're using the term opening and not being clear. The space, like if I'm going to open the door, the space that would be open first, where would that be if this is the front door and I'm Mr. Cataneo and I'm opening the door? Would I open it this way towards the back wall, where I'd be facing the wall? Or do I open it this way towards the sidewalk?
Towards the sidewalk.
Okay.
Thank you. May this witness be excused.
Yes. We'd like her just subject to recall just in
Okay,
case.
you're subject to recall. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor, we would like a subject to recall. We don't expect to have to do that.
Okay.
And we won't unless we absolutely have to.
That's fine.